Okay, I'd like to make a video about some lessons learned when building the tail feathers, and then a lesson learned building the wing ribs. Some mistakes I made that hopefully if someone else watches this video, they can avoid the mistakes on their Pietenpol build, especially if they're just getting started. Alright, let's start with the tail feathers. So one big thing is to realize that on the main beams and leading edges and trailing edges, there is one common thread in that the beams that go down the length of the that go horizontally down the length of the airplane, this like this right here, between those are always, the main beams are extended longer and these are cut to fit in between, okay? And then it's the same here, cut to fit in between. Same over here, cut to fit in between. And so on for all of these, right? I guess the only exception is kind of this, but that's not even a beam, that's just this piece you have to make. All right. Now, why is that important? Okay, well, if you're like me, you left these mostly rough cut in just a general shape. In this case, I made the T shape, right? But here, I didn't make this shape before I glued it all together. I left it flat, right? Same here, I left this flat, and I'm gonna carve the leading and trailing edges afterwards. Fine, the problem is that if you don't do that, what I talked about, you end up having to carve some end grain. Okay, so this is the trailing edge of my rudder, all right? And so here is the trailing edge beam, fine, but this beam should have extended and then cut this one off here. That makes sense. And then I could take my plane when I'm planing this and go all the way along and just take nice pieces off. As it is now, I get stuck on the end grain, and unless you can make a really sharp plane or you got some kind of low angle plane or whatever, that's hard to do. Okay, so that was a mistake on this one. Fortunately, I did it right on my elevators. You can see here, this is done right, see? So the beam comes up here and stops, and then I'm able to plane this off and carve it nice. See, beam comes up and stops, right? Okay, cool. Problem number 2 that I didn't see on all of this. Okay, so here, okay, see how this main beam has a T part, okay? You actually have to cut off the top and the bottom of that T to put your gussets in. So notice how the gusset extends past, or all the way to the end of the beam, right? Okay, I did that right here. I did it right here, here, here. But I wasn't paying attention when I first built, where is it? When I first built my vertical stabilizer, for instance. See? Is that a big deal? I don't know. But I wasn't paying really close attention to the plans. Okay, I don't think it's going to be a problem. I really don't. I think the structure's fine. I mean, theoretically, it would be slightly stronger if this, because you got greens going in both directions in the plywood, if that extended all the way over here, but I can't see that being a huge issue. And I had the same mistake here on my horizontal stabilizer, okay? And fortunately, when I did the top piece here, this beam came here, and that's actually what I wanted because I ended up carving it off to make the leading edge here, right? So it worked out. It's just, okay, And then this piece, you actually do inset it, okay? I'll show you in the plans where that is. This one's actually inset, okay? And same up here, this little piece of plywood that's kind of a shim, that's also inset. So just pay attention. I didn't. And one time it made my life harder, another time it's just not 100% to the plans. Again, I mean, like, there's not even any dimensions on these gussets, right? They're just like, make it look like that. So I don't think it's a huge deal. I think my gussets are the same size, they're just shifted in a little bit. So yeah, I think it's gonna be fine. The impression that I got from looking through the plans is that there's dimensions where it matters. And where there's not dimensions, you just build it to look right. And it's going to be just fine. Okay, so on to the wing ribs. So let's move to the next Not here. Not here. Okay, here. So what I did when I built my wing ribs is I drew this up in CAD just to kind of get a feel for what I was doing. Also, I was bored and I didn't have any wood. And then I printed it off in full scale with several sheets of paper and taped them all together. I've done this before for building model airplanes, case in point, model airplane, model airplanes, whatever. But I didn't quite get the pages perfectly aligned with each other, and these errors all stacked up. And by the time I got over here, the beam that I had added to go next to the rear spar was at a slight angle, and we're talking about like, you know, 1/16 of an inch type thing. So I think I'm going to have to add a like a wedge in there to counteract for that. But okay, so we'll show this with a tape measure. It's supposed to be 27 3/4 inches from the inside of the front spar to the inside of the rear spar. So let's go measure that. 27 3/4. We're going to come over here. You'll have to forgive me, I'm using one hand to get a tape measure out. Okay. So we're going to hook that on over there. And I know this isn't perfect, but you see it's a little shy of 3/4 at the bottom, all right? And up here, that's pretty much on 27 3/4, okay? So what that means is this beam here is cocked in like that a little bit. Let me show you with something straighter. This beam here is cocked in like that a little bit. Obviously, I'm exaggerating. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a little wedge that's just going to plane down a board and cut little slices of a wedge that'll go in there, you know, like that, so that my spar is straight. Because thinking about it, if your spar is slightly crooked, well, then you've got some sort of like bending load on the spar instead of just like some kind of, you know, in the direction that it's narrowest, you'll have a slight bending load instead of in the direction that it's thickest. So lessons learned. Again, I don't think any of these are deal breakers, but they're things I was like, I wish I had thought of to check or to pay attention to, whatever. So the lesson for me, I guess, is study the plans really carefully and get a solid feel for how everything's supposed to work out before you start sewing. With all that said, I now have all the tail feathers built. Got to carve this one edge, and then I'll be done with the tail feathers. I've got my wing ribs built. You can see a stack of them over there. And in here are case halves for my Corvair engine. So we're making progress. My goal is to finish this in a few more years yet. So thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully this is helpful. Bye.